Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Tell your kids' teachers, the librarian, their principal. And please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Today we're very excited to welcome back one of our favorite guest hosts, Jordan Sahley. Hey, Jordan.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Today I'm joined by Erin Stewart, author of The Words We Keep. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. It's Valentine's Day today, so.
Yeah, happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, happy Valentine's Day.
You're wearing a pink shirt. Oh my gosh, I feel so underprepared right now.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that it was not going to be video, just audio, so I decided to wear my Valentine's shirt. So, but it's good to get up and get ready for the day, so.
Well, I appreciate that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, so The Words We Keep came out in 2022, and it's about a girl named Lily who struggles with anxiety, especially because her sister also struggles with mental health issues that are a little bit more visible. So Lily feels like she has to kind of keep her anxiety in check to keep her family together, and has to do everything perfectly and be the perfect daughter to kind of make up for her sister's more visible disabilities. But eventually Lily has to learn to speak up and get the help she needs, and to realize that she deserves that help, and that she deserves to speak up about her anxiety that is pretty crippling.
Yeah, that's a huge thing that kids today need to learn, because I know growing up, no one felt comfortable asking for help, and I think it's more of a thing now.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I do think that stigma is a lot better now of asking for help, but it's still there, that sometimes people don't recognize that it actually is anxiety or something that they can get help for. They just think, oh, this is the way I am. This is the way my life is. So, but definitely that stigma has gotten better, which is really, really great.
Yeah, it is nice. And people need help now more than ever, because after everything that happened with COVID and then everything going on, like in the political world, I feel like it's more relevant now than ever.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like people, especially teenagers, had anxiety, had depression, were dealing with some of the things, and then COVID just kind of exposed it all. Like all the things we were trying to just get by with, COVID laid it all bare and made it so we couldn't just squeak by with all our issues.
Yeah, you had to really sit there and think about it. It's like, what am I gonna do now? Do you struggle with anxiety and like mental health issues?
I do. So I've struggled with anxiety my whole life. When I was growing up, so I'm 40 now. I can't believe I'm 40. I'm 40 now. And when I was growing up, we didn't really use the word anxiety like we use it now. It wasn't like a label for a mental health concern. It was more just like, oh, she's nervous, or oh, she's a worrywart. She's a worrier. That's what my mom said about me when I was growing up. You're a worrier. But now we use the term anxiety, but I didn't really know that that's what I was dealing with. I just thought it was a part of myself, of my personality that I didn't really like. But now I know what it is, that it is a term. It's a diagnosable term. It's an actual disorder that I have. It was pretty debilitating growing up. So I do struggle with that, with feelings of I'm not enough, with intrusive thoughts, kind of picking away at me and telling me I'm not good enough. And then just kind of the constant worrying in all situations that can be really debilitating. And when I went to write this book, actually, my first book was called Scars Like Wings, and it was a 2-book deal. So this was my second book, and I pitched a bunch of ideas to my editor for the second book, and none of them really hit home, and none of them really landed. And then my agent said, well, why don't you write about your anxiety? Because she works with me and knows that I have anxiety. And at first I was like, oh, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. Because you have this piece of yourself that you've been kind of running from, right, your whole life and being humiliated by your whole life, why in the world would you want to spend a year delving into it and writing a book about it? So I was like, that's a terrible idea. So I kind of brushed it off at first, but then of course, once the seed was planted, I couldn't stop. And then the idea and the characters started building, and the story started coming, and she was right. I needed to write this book about my anxiety, and it was hard. It was hard to write about something so personal to me and so dark for me. And I had to go to a pretty dark place to get it out and get it on paper. But once I did, I feel like it was actually really cathartic, and really helpful for me to, like Lily in the book, to actually face my demons and own them and be like, this is a part of me, and that's okay. And that doesn't make me less than, it doesn't make me, crazy. It just means that I am a normal human being who has some anxieties.
Yeah. It's really easy to like hate on yourself for having anxiety or having these traits, but then as soon as you see someone else like writing a character like Lily who has it, then you're like, oh, they're very likable. And like, it is cathartic because you can be like, oh, maybe I do deserve to be nicer to myself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that's like my whole goal with this book is to have teenagers read it and be like, oh, I'm not alone. This is a thing. This is just a thing that we can live with, that we can get help for, and it's okay. And I don't have to hate myself for it. And that's the whole goal. And I get a lot of like DMs or emails from teenagers who have read the book who tell me that, who say, oh, I didn't think people had an anxiety in the shape and form that I have it. And this book made me feel so seen, and it made me feel like I'm not the only one with that. And that's like, for me as an author, that's like the whole goal, is to hear teenagers say like, this made me feel seen, is like, oh, I did it. And like, that was the goal. So.
And it's such a beautiful thing to find people who like can relate to that aspect. I know I had really bad anxiety my whole life, and I got diagnosed with OCD after high school. And then when I found, like, I always thought I was so weird, and then I found like a group of people with OCD through like my therapy and through my school and stuff, and it is so relieving to know like, oh, I'm not just crazy, this is like a thing that's happening. And it's always so scary to get like a diagnosis. I don't know why, but there's like such a stigma around it.
It is scary to get a diagnosis because there's this fear that you're going to become the diagnosis. Like, I'm the OCD girl, right? Or I'm the anxiety girl. And we deal with OCD in our family, and there's some OCD in the book. Because OCD is an anxiety. It's under the anxiety umbrella. It's all tied together. But yeah, there's fear that once you get a diagnosis, that's all you'll be. And that's kind of one of the things I address in the book, is that we're so much more than that diagnosis or that label. Yes, it's part of us, just like being blonde or tall. Like, it's a part of who we are, but it isn't who we are. There's so much more to it. And I do think people fear speaking up and fear diagnosis because they don't want to become that person, that's what they're known for. No one wants to be known for a mental health issue. Like, but we're so much more than that. And hopefully in this book, Lily is a fully fleshed out, beautiful teenage girl who has lots of talents and lots to offer the world. This anxiety piece is just a piece. It's just a part of who she is.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like the way media has always portrayed mental illness, I mean, obviously it's so much better now, like so much better, but I feel like before, like, being OCD or being bipolar was such like a derogatory term to refer to them as. So it's nice to see like books like yours being written that's like in a positive light and more realistic, for sure.
Yeah. When I was, just one little anecdote, when I was on a book tour for Scars Like Wings, I was visiting a high school back in DC, and I was telling the girls, it was an all-girls school, I was telling them that I was writing this book and the main character struggled with anxiety. And this one little girl in the front row, when I got done with my talk, I was like, does anyone have any questions? And she raised her hand. She was very timid, and she raised her hand and she said, well, how do you fix it? And I was like, fix what? And she was like, the girl in your book, how do you fix the problem of anxiety? And it was like such a moment for me. I was still drafting The Words We Keep, but it was such a moment for me of like, what this girl is asking is, how do you fix me? How do I fix myself? Right? Like, that's what she's asking. And it kind of broke my heart. And I made sure in my book from that point on to make it clear that you don't fix you, because you're not broken. There's nothing broken about you if you struggle with mental health. It's just an issue that you're dealing with. It's something you're probably going to live with your whole life, and you have to learn to live with it, but you're not a broken anything. You're not a broken person. And so I hope that girl, I hope she read it at one point and left with that message of, I don't have to fix me. I'm not a broken person. I'm just a person. So that really stuck with me.
That's so sad to hear, because that girl probably was struggling with anxiety and was like, how do I fix myself?
Yeah. Like, what's the quick fix? Like, how do you get rid of it? And I'm like, oh, there isn't, but that doesn't mean you're a lesser person because you struggle with that. So,
yeah. And when I was younger, I used to Google all the time, like, how to make anxiety stop. And WikiHow was no use to me.
Yeah, where it's like, meditate. It's like, yeah, that's hard. Yeah. Google's not going to cut it, probably.
Did you have any, like, I don't know, shows or movies or books that were, like, useful to you mental health wise, like growing up, that you read?
I wish that I had. So growing up, again, like I grew up in like the 80s and 90s. So YA didn't really take off until after I was a teenager. There were some young adult books, but mostly we read like what our parents read, like that's what we read. There wasn't a young adult genre per se. So I didn't have a lot of books growing up. I wish I had, though. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, is because I didn't have that growing up. I didn't see characters like this who were living wonderful lives and having a romance and doing all these things with their anxiety. And so I really wished I had that. But since young adult has become a genre, let's see, I was seeing if I have any of my books here, but All the Bright Places was a great one for me. I loved that one. Really anything written by Laurie Halse Anderson, Speak, Winter Girls, those all deal with some mental health issues, and the way she writes them really resonates with me. I'm sure there's more, there's like a million I'm sure I'm forgetting, but those come to mind right away. Oh, A Breath Too Late, that came out a couple years ago during COVID. That's about suicidal ideation and suicide. Yeah, those are some of the big ones. But yes, I wish I had that. And it's so great that there are books like this now that their kids can go, and whatever they're dealing with, there's a book, there's a character that they can grab onto and identify with. And that's so great. Definitely wish I had that growing up.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have kids of your own?
I do. I have 3 kids. I have a 15-year-old daughter who's a sophomore in high school, and then a 12-year-old who's a 7th grader, and then a 6-year-old son who is in 1st grade. And they're all off at school today. So
do you show them a lot of like the books you like and media about mental health?
Yeah, for sure. So the thing about mental health is you do have to make sure a child is ready for those books. So like in The Words We Keep, there are some darker things. There is some suicidal ideation. And I think it's rated for 12 and up. I have to look because I don't know. So I would definitely follow like the age guidelines that the publisher puts out, because there are some books that are maybe a little too intense. So my kids have read my books, because my girls have read my books, not my 6-year-olds, but my girls that are 12 and up have read my books. And that's actually been a really great experience to share with them, because the great thing about reading these kind of books about mental health is they're conversation starters. So if your kid reads this book about suicidal ideation and anxiety, they're going to want to talk about it. And so I think it's really important for parents to be available to talk about it. Read the book alongside them so you know what they're reading about. And you can be like, do you ever feel that way? Have you ever felt something like that? Have you ever had these intrusive thoughts? And maybe they're like, no, I haven't, but it really helped me understand people that do. Or maybe they're like, yeah, actually, I've been wanting to talk to you, but I didn't know how to start the conversation. So books can be a really great jumping off point for conversations between parents and kids. And so my kids and I have had some good conversations. So one of my daughters struggles with pretty severe OCD, and she's had some suicidal episodes. And when I was still drafting The Words We Keep, she read the last chapter of it, because I wanted to make sure, the climactic chapter, I should say. I wanted to make sure I was really getting this scene right. And she read it. And after she read it, she was mad, and she was like, how did you know all this? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, how do you know the thoughts that I have? And I was like, well, because I have those thoughts. We all have those thoughts at some point in our lives, right? For some of us, it's more debilitating, but we all have these negative self-talk thoughts, right? And that was a real bonding moment for us, because I remember she sat there and she was mad at first, and then she kind of softened and she was like, oh, I thought I was the only one. And to me, it was like, that's the whole point. Like, you're not the only one. There's so many people you could talk to and bond with and struggle with. You know, we can struggle together as we're figuring this out. And so for me and for my daughters, it's been a great connecting journey with books like this that open the conversation. So
Sure, it's so awkward to start that conversation as a teen. I know I couldn't talk to my parents about that like whatsoever.
so awkward. And you're so like worried that you're going to disappoint someone, right? That they're going to be like, oh, where did we go wrong? We failed you. What, you know, or they're going to try and fix you or take you to a doctor right away or whatever. Like, you don't know how it's going to go. So I think using books is a great way to kind of feel out the conversation without having to be like, let's sit down and talk about your mental health. You know, like, that's awkward. No one's going to do that. So.
For sure, yeah. I know mainly like parents from my generation, they all grew up with like mental health as weakness and like don't
Right.
go to therapy and that kind of thing. So hopefully like if parents were to read this with their kids, it would help them to like have a better understanding as well.
Yeah, I hope so. And actually the dad in the book, who I love, I love that character. He's so well-meaning and he's trying his best. And the mother has passed away years earlier, so he's on his own. He's really trying. He's got these daughters and he's trying to figure out and be a good dad. But he, like most parents, there's no manual. He doesn't know how to deal with this. He doesn't know. He's trying and he's struggling too because he sees his daughter suffering and that hurts him. And so there's just a lot of people trying their best for each other, but not really knowing how to navigate the waters. And that's totally normal and totally fine. And that's why you get help from a professional who does know how to navigate the waters, because most of the time parents aren't going to know what to do. And I know with my own children, sometimes when you're so close to it and it's your own kids, it's really hard to not get emotionally invested. And once you're like over emotional about it, that doesn't help anyone. That just scares everyone off from talking about it. So having a third party, a doctor, a psychiatrist, psychologist, someone to help you kind of get through it who's not emotionally invested can be really, really beneficial for families.
For sure. Like seeing like, I know when I like told my mom about like all the stuff I was dealing with, like she cried a bit, which like was obviously like she loved me, you know, but
Right.
like it's so hard to like see that. And I feel like that's something that like so many people fear, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think parents learning more about it as well, like it's just so important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Looking out for the signs and stuff.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Some of the adults that have read it and have reached out to me say like, you know, my daughter was struggling with this, my son was struggling with this, but I never really knew what it looked like until I read the book. And then I was like, oh, this is what he's dealing with. I thought he was just a cranky teenager pushing me away. And then they're like, oh, but I saw the subtle signs in the book that I see in my child. And so it's helped them identify, which again, as an author is like, yay, that makes me feel like I've done my job. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you ever have these kinds of conversations with like your parents when you were younger?
No, like you said, like, well, so one, yeah, growing up, this was not something we talked about very openly. It did have this stigma of like, what's wrong with you and you're weak and why can't you just get it together? You know, that kind of feeling. And I don't blame my parents for that. That was just the way it was. And generationally, that's the way it was. So actually when my mom I always let my mom read my books before they come out. So she has like a heads up about what's going out into the world. And she was like pretty blown away that this isn't my experience, but she was blown away that I drew from my experience where she was like, I had no idea it was so bad for you. And she wouldn't have because I didn't talk about it. I struggled by myself. I told friends sometimes, you know, that's what we do. We turn to our friends. But she didn't know that it was this constant and debilitating for me and that it's followed me into adulthood because I didn't get the help I need. I did actually writing this book, my anxiety got a lot worse because of having to face it. So I think when you face something, you're going to go through a worsening of symptoms before you can come out, you know, the other side. So I did actually start on anxiety medicine while writing this book because I just couldn't get through it otherwise. And I should have started that medicine 20 years ago. And there was this stigma, like you said, of getting a diagnosis, but also taking medicine. It's like, oh, now I'm medicated for this thing. Like, how messed up am I? Like it's such a big step. But when I took that first pill, I remember feeling so defeated by it that like, I need medicine. I'm at that point, but then also proud of myself for going to that point and getting the medicine. It was this weird mix of feeling defeated and proud. But now that I've been on it for several years, I'm like, why did I wait so long? Not that medicine's the answer for everyone, but for me, it's like, this could have helped me not have to struggle every single day of my life. And it's been a huge thing for me. And that was a huge mental hurdle for me to overcome, that stigma of being medicated for my anxiety. So
I felt the same way once I got medicated. I was like, I wasted so much time.
Right?
Why have I not been doing this?
Yes, it really, for me, it's made a huge difference. And yeah, it makes me think like, why didn't I just do this before? But the journey is the journey. And once, you have to do it when it's right and you get there eventually. But for me, I was like, oh, I wish I had done this earlier.
Yeah. It feels like I can function again. And I feel like that's literally the bare minimum to ask for. So no one should
right? Yeah.
of that. You also won, was it the Schneider Family Book Award for Teens?
Yeah.
Yeah. How did that feel, getting that award?
So embarrassing though. So it's from the American Library Association, and they're like really big awards in the literary world. So like they were not even on my radar. Like my book's been out for a while. It's done well and people love it, but it's like, it just wasn't on my radar as like, I'm going to win a big award for this book. So they called on Sunday morning, and I wasn't even aware that this was like the big day that they make their award calls, because I just wasn't even on my radar, like I said. And so they called, and at first I thought it was like a marketing call. So I was kind of like, who is this? and then I thought it was, and then when they were like, this is the ALA committee and this, and then I thought it was like a prank call from like one of my friends just being a jerk, like telling me I'd won this big award. So I was kind of like in shock and didn't say anything. And then I like heard the committee in the background. They're like all on the speakerphone. And so then I started being like, oh, this is legit. This is a real thing that's happening. And so then I was like, oh, thank you so much. Like, thank you. And I was such an idiot. I wish I could go back and redo that call, because they probably were like, she's so rude. I just was like so shocked that I didn't register that this was an actual thing that was happening. So, but then once I like realized it, got my bearings, and then it's such an honor, because so the Schneider Family Book Award is given annually to a book that embodies the artistic expression of the disability experience. Which is just an amazing award for this book to win, because a lot of times when we think of disability, we don't think of mental health issues as a disability, but they are. And they can, for some people, they are a chronic, debilitating disability. And so for me, I was like, oh, that's so great to have this book recognized in that specific award, because it legitimizes the struggle almost. It legitimizes what people are going through, to say, this is a real disability. This is a real thing. And this is something you can get help for, just like any other disability. It's not something we need to be embarrassed or afraid of talking about. And also it's something that probably isn't going to go away. There's no magical fix for mental health. Sometimes there is. Sometimes there's periods in your life where you're having just a very temporary thing. But for most of us, like you and me, who struggle with anxiety, that's like a lifelong thing, a chronic disability we're going to have. And so the key to that is to manage it and face it, and to make friends with our monsters, but to know that this is a chronic thing that's going to be something that we live with, and it's just part of our lives. And you know what? That's okay. You can live a very full, wonderful, beautiful life with anxiety, with mental health, just like anyone with a disability can lead a wonderful, beautiful, full life. That's no less than anything else. So sorry, I could rant for this forever, but I was just so honored that it was recognized as a book that expresses disability, because what a great acknowledgement that mental health issues can be debilitating and chronic in the way that a disability can.
Yeah, that is awesome that it got acknowledged for that.
Yeah.
Another thing with like OCD and like mental health stuff, like when you are able to like live that full life that you can, like it also feels so rewarding to know like I did it, like I overcame this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, for kids who are struggling, who read my book, like, I wanted to be an author my whole life. I wanted to write books, and I'm doing it. And I'm doing it alongside my anxiety. I still have it. That pill I take doesn't take it away. Like you said, it hits the bare minimum of letting us like get up and function in the morning. But I still have to manage it and deal with it. But I'm living my dream. I'm doing what I want. Nothing, like, it did not stop me, and it doesn't have to stop you. It's just something you live with.
Yeah. This is really an awesome book for anyone to, like, parents to read with their kids. What kind of, like, specific conversations do you hope that parents can have with their kids while reading this?
Yeah, so I would hope that parents can talk to their kids about, so there are, like I said, some suicidal ideation themes, nothing too graphic, but suicidal ideation still has such a stigma, like, oh, if you have those thoughts, there's something really wrong. But you know what? Those thoughts go through everyone's heads at some point, and they can become more of a problem if they're always there. But I think talking to kids about how some of these things are normal, having some of these thoughts that seem scary and bad are so normal and everyone has them, is so healing for kids to hear that, because I think sometimes with mental health, we become obsessed with like, I'm bad for having these thoughts. And that just spirals into more mental health issues and depression. And then it just becomes this unbeatable monster, right? But to know that it's normal and that pretty much everyone's having those thoughts at some point can just be so reassuring to people and make it not so daunting. So I would hope that the conversation, whatever conversation you have, whatever piece of this book stands out to you and connects with your child, it's about normalizing these things, because the more they're normalized, the more they feel like something we can actually tackle and deal with. And they don't seem like this awful, horrible thing that nobody can know that we're struggling with. So just normalizing those things is what I would hope.
For sure. Yeah. I wish I had something like that to talk to my parents about when I was younger.
Yeah. And again, like I said, like this is books like these are such a great jumping off point where it doesn't have to be so awkward, where it can be like, hey, we're going to read this book as a family. We're going to read this book together and then talk about it. It's such a good sneaky way to get into this conversation where it's like you're talking about a book, but no, you're really talking about, hey, what do you identify with? What stands out to you? And what stands out to your kid is a good indicator of maybe what they're dealing with or what they're sensitive to.
Yeah, sure. And if someone wanted to find this book or any of your other work, where could they go to find that? Do you have a website?
I do have a website. It's www.erinstewartbooks.com. And then you can buy The Words We Keep on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. And then my first book is called Scars Like Wings, and you can find that one as well. It's not about mental health. It's more about grief and recovery from grief. So I write about heavy topics. I don't write rom-coms.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so you can find it anywhere, but that's my website. And you can reach out to me on my website too. There's a link there that you can email me. So.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation. I could talk about this forever. You can tell I'm pretty passionate about it.
Oh, me too. I realized that we went way over towards the end.
Oh, sorry. I just got going.
No, I love it. But yeah, thank you for coming on, and thank you to everyone for listening to today's episode, and we will see you guys all tomorrow for the next episode.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast and will join us for the next exciting episode. If you want to make sure you don't miss a second of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitch Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. And also be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com and download your copy of the Reading With Your Kids online magazine. It's free. It's available at readingwithyourkids.com. Just click on our blog. Before we go, I want to make sure that I give a big thank you to my team: Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dairies, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary. I want to give a big thank you to my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, and most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.